Hi, everybody. How are you today? I'm reading Rob Bell's newest book, Everything is Spiritual, Who We Are and What We're Doing Here. And it's a great Bell book. You know, he puts things in a way that, well, sometimes it challenges me. Always it informs me. But I wanted to share something from the beginning of the book, especially because we're coming up on the holiday, when I know we will be thinking of family, whether we are with family or not. It depends on if they're in our bubble during this COVID Christmas. But even if we're not, we notice who's there and who's not. And he begins with some stories about losses in his family, different people who've died. And in his family, they didn't talk about it and process it for years. But he writes here, "Their losses shaped me. I never met Preston or Douglas, and yet they've been present in my life from the beginning. Their absence has been a form of presence." In his case, they were people who had died before he was born, relatives of his. And the family never talked about it, yet they carried the memories, and, well, their presence was felt in their absence. And this Christmas, I'm really aware of people who will be absent around tables or around the Christmas tree, or people for whom maybe folks bought presents and then they're not there to receive them, or maybe they had, the missing people had bought presents and then maybe died or left before the gifts were given. And so we have that as a reminder that they're not here and how precious those gifts become. And, we are shaped. Their absence shapes us. I find that the farther we get away from the birth of the Christ child, the more we shape that into what we need it to be, the story, into what we need it to be. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. I agree with Rob Bell that everything is spiritual, or it can be if we approach it that way. And that there is something to be said for the act of creating the story, creating the birth of Jesus, whose name we bear and who we choose to follow. There's something about making that story our own. And I think we do that with family traditions. We do that through our hymns. You never think about how much theology was shaped by our hymns. That's another story for another day. But it begs the fact for me that we continue to be shaped by unseen forces, whether they are people who are missing, or they're things happening around us in our environment, or they're attitudes that people express, and sometimes we take them on without thinking. It's like, yeah, I feel that way too, and then we think about it later and we're going, wait, what did I say? I'm not so sure I felt that way. There's something about living in this life where we are constantly unfolding our understanding of who we are. We grow into it, maybe. We expand it somehow. Sometimes we pray for insight. Sometimes we're convinced there's nothing to pray to for a time in our lives. I always say to people when they ask me about God, whether God exists or not, it doesn't change the reality of whether God exists or not. If God doesn't exist, it's not going to matter if I believe that God does. And if God does exist, it really isn't going to change God at all if I believe that or not. So it's sort of important for us to figure out what is it that makes us better people, what makes us grow, what invites us to be on this path, on this spiritual journey, and then to go about bringing those forces, those energies into our lives. And around Christmas, I think we tend to become maybe a little more pensive, a little more aware. We have things around us that only show up usually occasionally during the year, like a Christmas tree or a special and meaningful plate or a bowl or a dish or a recipe. Or we reach out to people, or they reach out to us, whether through Christmas cards or with phone calls or connecting in some way. And it's like we want to annually update everybody, and in so doing, we are owning where we have come in the last year. And this year and every year, we're shaped by the people who aren't there, and we're shaped by the people who are still there. So we're a week out, roughly, from Christmas. And I invite you to be thinking about those people who aren't there. And if you need to cry about them, cry about them. But then also take time to embrace what their lives have brought to you. And in their absence, when, we can either look at their absence as this big empty space, like at the table or in our hearts, or we can look at it, take a step back and see how much that space was filled with whatever it is that were the gifts that they gave us. On occasion, there might be someone that we are gifted by their not being there any longer. It was a particularly difficult or abusive relationship. And it's okay to feel grateful that they are not there. We don't have to feel guilty about that. So as we begin to ramp up for the holidays, and as I say, they'll be very different because of COVID. But many of us think back on past years. Go ahead, revisit them. Who was there even though they weren't really there? They might have died before you were born, but they were still at the table. Who will be at the table next year, do you think, and who might not be? Does that change how you appreciate them this year? And as you look ahead to next year, pretend that you are ahead at next year and you're looking back on this year. What are the gifts of this Christmas season 2020? A year from now, what will you see as the gifts from this time? Okay? That's enough to think about for today. Thanks for joining me in this prayerful pause with the pastor. I'm Pastor Deb Swift of South Presbyterian Church in Rochester, New York, and this has been a time for us to think about something greater than ourselves. In this case, sort of the continuum of life and the spirituality of how we are shaped and how we become who we become. Because then there's another part to this is how we shape the lives of others, but I'll leave that up to you to explore on your own. All right, everybody. Take care. God bless. See you next time. Bye for now.